Many of you would call Chris Hemsworth a tremendously successful actor, and very rightfully so. He became a major part of the biggest movie franchise of all time by landing the role of Thor. But he's also one of the unluckiest actors in the industry, because every time he starred in a movie without his mighty hammer, it ended up being a flop at the box office. And since the whole MCU might get rebooted after Secret Wars, it'll be really fascinating to see what happens to his career once it's lost its greatest asset. But this video won't be about predicting his future. This one is a journey through his incredible acting career that's been full of amazing ups and devastating downs. So let's go all the way back to 2007 to check out the first roles he landed shortly after moving to the US from Australia. Hemsworth was extremely lucky to get the role of George Kirk in the Star Trek reboot. Initially, J.J. Abrams wanted to have Matt Damon play this role, whose career was at the top of the world at the time. The two even had talks about the gig, but Damon had to reject, explaining that his presence in such a small role would divert the audience's attention from the main character. Abrams agreed and signed Hemsworth, who was actively searching for his first job in Hollywood. Star Trek premiered in 2009, and while it wasn't a big success, it was enough. Chris's performance was noted as positive by critics, and he gained the first wave of recognition he needed. But the other two movies that he signed up for didn't do him any good. A Perfect Getaway was released 3 months after Star Trek and bombed, and the situation with Cash was even worse. It was a really small movie that was released only on 27 theater screens. The income numbers were so low, the screening wasn't expanded, and the movie went straight to DVD. If it wasn't for his role in Star Trek, Chris would already be buying his acting career a one-way ticket back to Australian soap operas. But this supporting role helped him book a lead one in a movie that no one really cared about at the time. Chris Hemsworth was cast as the God of Thunder. In order to land the role of Thor, Chris had to take his own brother Liam down. They both made it to the final stage of auditioning along with Alexander Skarsgård and Tom Hiddleston, but it was Chris Hemsworth who took the win home. In 2011, Marvel was just some comic book studio that got just acquired by Disney. It was making movies about its B or even C-list characters, since the A-listers got sold to Sony and Fox, and people weren't too into checking out its projects in theaters. The movie made $449 million against the production budget of $150 million, and despite the box office numbers were lower than Iron Man's, it still was a success. After Thor's premiere, Hemsworth got immediately bombarded by big movie producers of all sorts. But there also were a few small movies to which he had signed up for prior to filming in Thor. The Cabin in the Woods is written and directed by Drew Goddard, who will later adapt The Martian and Project Hail Mary for the big screen. It was filmed in 2009 but was shelved for 3 years due to the enormous financial difficulties of MGM. Thanks to the studio selling the film's rights to Lionsgate in 2011, the movie eventually got its distribution arranged. It came out in 2012, gaining mostly positive reviews but barely turning any profit. And if The Cabin in the Woods couldn't have caused Hemsworth's career any serious damage, the same cannot be said about the next one whatsoever, because that was the ultimate career destroyer in which Chris had a leading role. If you're 50 or older, you should remember this 1984 movie about a bunch of kids protecting Colorado from the Soviet invaders. And for anyone who's younger, the movie is Red Dawn. And this is the Red Dawn remake that was greenlit by MGM in 2008. And let me just tell you, putting this movie into production was the biggest and most devastating mistake that those producers made. And it was definitely a big mistake for Chris to be a part of this movie. The film in itself didn't suffer from any complications. It was the post-production phase when they realized they were totally fucked. You see, during the late 2000s, the Chinese movie market was on its way to become one of the most lucrative ones on the planet, and each major Hollywood movie studio was very eager to be present there. But why am I even bringing this up while talking about the remake of the movie that's about the Soviet invasion of the US? Well, the reason for that is because in the case of the remake, it was decided that it would be China that would be this big and terrifying invader this time around. After some parts of the script were leaked online, it immediately got ugly. The film was overwhelmed by negativity, with one of the biggest Chinese state-run newspapers straight up calling it an attempt to demonize China, and the original Red Dawn's director called the script of the remake terrible, stating it was really stupid to make the antagonists Chinese. So as you've already understood, making a movie and setting up China as a bad guy instantly kills the distribution opportunities on its territory, not just for this movie, but perhaps for all of the projects to come. And for a major Hollywood studio, this literally means missing out on hundreds of $millions worth of international gross per project. Now, obviously, MGM didn't want to destroy its relationship with the Chinese market, so what did the studio do in order to resolve such a disastrous situation? There was one big digital overhaul to North Korea. And by digital, I mean changing all of the Chinese flags and posters demonstrated in the movie to North Korean and changing the Chinese dialogue to Korean, all of which was made in post-production and cost less than $1 million. Anyway, the movie was such a mess, it was eventually sold to an independent studio and was released in 2012 after being shelved for 3 years as well. Red Dawn could have destroyed Hemsworth once and for all, but it came out exactly at the time when it already couldn't have caused him any harm. But before we move on, a like and a sub to the channel would be greatly appreciated. The release of The Avengers in 2012 showed every movie studio in Hollywood it could earn not just a lot, but ginormous amounts of bucks. The projected numbers were so appealing that Warner Brothers couldn't wait any longer and instantly rushed its DC Extended Universe into production, and we all know how that went. And Chris, well, he became a superstar, which helped him find new box office bombs to flop in. Snow White and the Huntsman came out only a month after The Avengers, which basically destroyed all of its box office potential. But it wasn't the only movie to see its box office numbers go lower than expected. Back then, no one expected The Avengers to be that big, since the last highest grossing movie of Marvel's prior to The Avengers was the sequel of Iron Man that earned a little more than 600 mil, which was a pretty good result, but nothing to be afraid of, really. That's why all the other movie studios were confidently placing their movies right next to The Avengers, having absolutely no idea what was coming at them. Tim Burton's Dark Shadows, for instance, released only a week after The Avengers, didn't stand a chance. And Battleship, released 2 weeks after, got completely annihilated. Even Men in Black 3 definitely felt the competition, earning just enough to break even. And we're going into 2013, where Hemsworth had 2 movies. Released in September, Rush by Ron Howard wasn't that much of a success. But the scores were high and the awards nominations were pouring in, no one noticed the box office numbers were low. Overall, Rush is a solid sports drama, and I highly recommend it to everyone who's interested in racing or sports drama on the whole, so check it out sometime, alright? And we're back with Marvel because 2013 was also the time for Thor's sequel. The Dark World was the first problematic movie in the MCU for several reasons. For starters, Jane's role got reworked and expanded, and Loki was brought in, initially being no part of the equation. The director asked Joss Whedon to come over and rewrite a couple of scenes he thought weren't working for the movie properly, and that also provoked additional reshoots for the film. But nonetheless, the movie was a solid success, because people were now hooked to everything the MCU was pumping out. And now we skip to Blackhat, released in 2015, because Hemsworth didn't have anything come out in 2014. At the time of its release, Blackhat was also described as Michael Mann's misfire. This time, the main issue of the film was the casting of Chris Hemsworth himself. People just didn't get why he was playing the hacker, since those guys are either pale and skinny or fat and in a wheelchair, and Chris had nothing in common with any of those descriptions. Hemsworth had expressed his dissatisfaction with his performance later, stating that it, quote, just felt flat. The reviews, both by the critics and the regular viewers, were terrible, and the box office returns were dreadful as well. Only 19 million earned on a 70 million budget. Blackhat was a disaster. I feel like I should also put the 2015's Vacation movie here, but this one will be brief. Despite having mostly low scores, it was a financial success, but it wasn't big enough for a rebirth of the once popular series of comedy films starring Chevy Chase. Perhaps that was the reason why there weren't any sequels to the new one. But even if it was all those things they wanted it to be, it still isn't a Chris Hemsworth film because he only appeared there for like 5 minutes. So let's jump straight into the one where he had a noticeable amount of screen time, because he had a leading role in this movie. And guess what? It also tanked really hard. In the Heart of the Sea had to be a box office hit for both Hemsworth's and Warner Brothers' sakes, because a $100 million budget is no joke. For this role, he lost 40 pounds and had a special diet of only 500 calories a day. Hemsworth stated that it was physically and emotionally the hardest movie he's been a part of. But not many people showed up in theaters to check out Chris's transformation, because this film had one major problem. It was released 1 week before The Force fucking Awakens. The 7th episode of Star Wars was the sequel to one of the most beloved trilogies of all time, which took 32 years, the prequel trilogy, and the whole $4 billion Disney takeover to happen. And although the studio saw that coming and shifted the overseas release from December 16th to December 11th, the movie was completely doomed. During its third weekend, In the Heart of the Sea was pulled from 72% of theaters, which was the 4th biggest drop in the history at the time. With only $94 million earned throughout its entire theatrical run, that was a monumental box office bomb. 2015 was shaping up to be a total nightmare year for Hemsworth. Starring in 2 big-budget films, both of which bombed that catastrophically and received abysmal reviews, does irreversible damage to the career of any actor. But there was another movie that came out that year that completely turned everything around once again. Age of Ultron was another MCU movie that had a troubled production. There were disputes between the director and the studio execs about certain scenes, multiple reshoots, the addition of some familiar characters were eventually cut, lots of stuff. But it's the Avengers, baby, so again, the numbers were through the roof. Chris was once again saved by his life vest, got paid $5 million for the role, and headed into 2016. And in 2016 it was the weird sequel to Snow White and the Huntsman, but only about the Huntsman this time. The Winter War's budget was significantly cut due to the underwhelming performance of the predecessor. Kristen Stewart was kicked out and so was the director of the first movie, and that's why it was decided to center the story around Hemsworth's character. The result was awful. People deemed it an entirely unnecessary sequel and moved on with their lives. With a reported budget of $115 million, the film managed to gross only $165 million, making Universal lose $75 million on this movie's production. And I just cannot go any further without mentioning the Ghostbusters remake, the movie whose trailer had been the most disliked movie trailer on YouTube, with the dislike count reaching 1.1 million. The recently released Minecraft movie had an even worse situation with its trailer reaching 1.6 million dislikes, but the movie got to be a smash hit at the box office, which cannot be said about the Ghostbusters remake. It was actually a complete opposite. Only $229 million were earned on a $144 million budget. Sony reportedly lost $70 million making this film. And yet again, his career could have been toast had it not been for Mjolnir that swooped in at the perfect time and saved the day once again. It was the late 2017, everything was building up to Infinity War, the hype was ginormous. Thor's appearance got reworked, Led Zeppelin came in to sing, and that was enough. With the budget of $180 million, Thor Ragnarok brought in $855 million. Chris was paid $15 million for his role in this film. 2018 opened up with the action war film 12 Strong, and Hemsworth had a leading role in it. And it flopped as well. $35 million spent and only $71 million earned. No one found anything special about it, it was just a movie based on a true story about the great American soldiers. That's pretty much it. Let's move on. Times at the El-Royale was a very underrated film. It was Goddard's next attempt at directing. I really enjoyed it and so did the others. The viewers and the critics praised the writing and many were referring to the Tarantino vibes this film clearly has. But unfortunately it was such a devastating bomb that it had no chances at making up for its losses even when it came out on digital. A little less than $32 million was earned on a $32 million budget. Truly shocking. And yeah, 2018 was also the year when Infinity War was released, and you all know what happened. $2 billion earned at the box office, the fourth highest grossing movie of all time. It had the biggest opening weekend of all time, and it was the fastest film to make $1 billion at the box office, beating the result of The Force Awakens. For starring in Infinity War, Hemsworth was also paid $15 million. But his lifetime curse to flop at everything except the MCU didn't go anywhere, and there was another major flop coming his way. The production of Men in Black International was atrocious. And I feel kinda bad for Chris on this one because initially he was signed up for a film that had a drastically different plot. It was supposed to revolve around the current debate of immigration, and its early script had a much edgier tone and was praised by Sony. Unfortunately, Sony's executive vice president of production who loved the script left the studio while the filming had already begun. The reins of the film's production were granted to Walter Parkes and Laurie MacDonald. They were another producers at Sony and they hated the initial script. So they stepped in and started rewriting the story mid-filming, which was driving the director F. Gary Gray nuts, and he wanted to quit multiple times. The new scripts were being delivered to the actors literally on the day of filming. It was that crazy. Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson were so dissatisfied with those scripts that they hired their personal dialogue writers to figure out their lines. Sony was eventually presented with two cuts of the film, one that was made by F. Gary Gray and the second one made by Parkes. And Sony went with the Parkes' cut since Gary Gray's one required additional spendings for it to be fully completed. Men in Black International received mixed reviews and the box office numbers were really bad. When a franchise's soft reboot starts with those kinds of results, it is 100% clear there is no bright future for it ahead. So all the plans Sony had in the making were scrapped. I can't even imagine how awful F. Gary Gray must have felt. First, it was surviving through the ongoing clashes between Diesel and The Rock on the set of Fast 8, and then it was that crap? But let's get back to Hemsworth's filmography of 2019. What did we also get that year? Do you remember? That wasn't hard at all, was it? The release of Avengers Endgame and the impact it caused will forever be a part of cinema history. It was the highest grossing movie ever made until it was dethroned by the re-release of Avatar. And remember I mentioned all of those milestones that Infinity War crossed? Well, Endgame just beat Infinity War in all of those records. The $2 billion gross of Infinity War was a joke to Endgame because it took the movie only 11 days to match and surpass this ginormous number. And just so you know, it took the first Avatar 47 days to do the same back in 2009. Hemsworth was paid $15 million upfront, and he also earned $76.5 million later in 2019, thanks to Endgame's profit cuts. Liam must have gone insane out of jealousy, cause the only reason he wasn't cast as Thor was because he was considered too young to play the character, which made Chris enter the auditioning. 2020 was the year when the actor finally got his big win without the help of the MCU. While COVID was destroying the movie theater business, streaming was going through an unprecedented increase in viewership and revenue. Produced by the Russo brothers and Hemsworth himself, Extraction was a home run, bringing in 99 million viewers in just 4 weeks, and that was an absolute record for a Netflix film. While it's unclear how much Chris was paid for this one, he probably received a pretty decent producing bonus, and that success made him stay at Netflix for a little longer. And that little longer resulted in him getting cast in Spiderhead. No viewership metrics are available for this one because Netflix doesn't really share its data unless it was a big success just like Extraction. But everything still points to the fact that Spiderhead was a disappointing release. It was given mid-scores and the movie is pretty much forgotten already. And in 2022 it was Thor, Dumb and Dumber, Love and Thunder. Chris decided to get outside Netflix only for this one cause a giant $20 million paycheck was offered, and you pretty much know the rest. Him and Taika Waititi had lots of fun on set, they ruined the character, they made everything look like a complete joke, and Christian Bale was the only good this film had. Seriously, the first 5 minutes of the movie were the best ones in the entire thing. Drop a like if you're with me here. People were mad. Thor 4 was getting bad reviews left and right, but the movie still made a whopping 760 mil no problem. The only good thing is that it was one of the last crappy films that Marvel had good times with, cause it was about to get a whole new perspective of how awful things can get real fast. But let's get into 2023, where we're back with Netflix, cause it was time for Extraction's sequel. The second time Tyler Rake went on a killing spree was once again met with great viewership metrics, and very rightfully so. I'd say those movies are really cool, and if you like John Wick, then you'll definitely like these two, so let's wait for the third part, I guess. As for Chris, he was paid 20 mil for this one as well, which gave him the courage to enter the dangerous territories once again. This time he was headed for another popular franchise. Although Fury Road didn't earn much back in 2015, it still was an undeniably awesome film, at least from a visual standpoint. Hemsworth shared that he loved watching the old Mad Max films while growing up. He even auditioned for Fury Road, but as we all know, the role went to Tom Hardy. He later stated that he wasn't that big of a star at the time to earn the role of Max Rokitansky, but when it came to Furiosa, it was his time to enter this world, but as a villain. And just like it's been always happening to him, the movie was a colossal bomb, earning only $174 million on a $168 million budget. Warner Brothers lost $120 million on Furiosa. To put that into perspective, this is the same amount of money that could be used to make Obsession 160 times. Doesn't that blow your mind? And if you're wondering why did Furiosa tank so bad, well, it is believed that it was Dune 2 that got this movie destroyed alongside The Fall Guy that came out later. Devastated by the result, Chris Hemsworth went into voice acting, and guess what? It wasn't a very good result either. Transformers 1 is an animated origin story of the Transformers in which Hemsworth voiced Optimus Prime. If I am to be brief, people saw absolutely no interest in this one and went to see A Wild Robot instead, which was a much better choice. And while we're still on the topic, I want to use this platform to express my great desire to see Michael Bay once again direct a Transformers movie. So Mike, if you're watching, come on man, it's been a long time. And we've got ourselves to the latest Hemsworth's release. Crime 101 is another movie where Hemsworth has a leading role, so now you tell me what happens when a movie gets Chris Hemsworth as a lead. You got it precisely right, class, everyone gets an A. So basically this movie came out in February 2026 and no one saw it nor talked about it. End of the story. And that brings us right to Doomsday, which, by the way, could have already been out if it wasn't for the delay. Thor has been a part of the MCU since Phase 1, and based on his standalone trailer, he really looks like a killing off material, although the plans for Thor 5 are still going. Chris Hemsworth is now 42 and he's far from getting retired. He once found a true golden ticket for which many actors would be willing to sell their soul, but the ticket's expiration date isn't far and he better drop that flop magnet he's been carrying around with him all this time. So that's it. Drop a like, subscribe, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.